Hello, everyone. Welcome to the December edition of the CAB call. Before I even realized that the year has started, we seem to have come to the end of it. So I hope everyone had a wonderful 2021. Definitely better than 2020, I guess. But um, yeah, here we are. And as everybody knows, this is the Community Advisory Board call. The aim of this call is to basically get folks to interact with each other about general community matters pertaining to Cloud Foundry, and as the community stewards at the Cloud Foundry Foundation, representatives, I guess me and Chris, maybe we will share some details from the community, or rather the governance perspective of what's been happening with the Cloud Foundry. So, generally speaking, we just concluded a board meeting yesterday. Things are looking very optimistic for Cloud Foundry in general and specifically the Cloud Foundry community. Our wonderful technical oversight committee has been hard at work creating a lot of new and interesting ways in which people can contribute as a community and come together um, and push the limits of Cloud Foundry forward in general. There's uh, there's been some interesting developments in that regard. So all our um, working group um, maintainers have been marking a lot of issues as good first issues. So if there are folks out there who are listening who want to get started on contributing to Cloud Foundry, I think it's a wonderful place to um, get started and start making use of these issues marked as good first issue in order to pick things up and work with them. So another important um, change that I thought I should talk to folks about is what was formerly known as the Community Management Working Group is now the Service Management Working Group. And I'm dropping a link in chat for those folks who are interested in learning a little bit more about the service management team. So there's been an update in what they're responsible for and how they can work with that, and it's I guess it's a bit of a fork from what was discussed originally, but it makes a lot of sense to keep this going and work with that in general. There's um, there's also a big push for all the working groups to adopt an open roadmap. So going forward, everybody can start both consuming and contributing to the roadmap of each of the different working groups and have more of a say in steering um, the way working groups are putting out solutions in general. So, yeah, those are really the the big sort of updates from the community. So, I guess we can move on to the big Log4j topic, unless anyone has any questions or want to add anything. Okay, so um, much like the rest of the world, I guess the Cloud Foundry community has also had a busy weekend. Unfortunately, it had to happen uh, before the holidays when everybody is in like a celebratory mood. But at least it happened when everybody was in office, I guess, and um, not exactly celebrating. So Um, for those who need a little more context, um, there is a remote code execution vulnerability that could be exploited on the Log4j um, tool. So anything that was any version of Log4j before 2.15, I guess, um, was identified as being vulnerable, and it was a very critical severity. And so the Cloud Foundry code base is not an exception um, I guess, a lot of other software. Um, we have also been using Log4j in a few components, and we specifically identified like 5 areas where we needed some urgent um, efforts to go in and do the fix. So mitigating this is, fairly straightforward. You had to update the version of Log4j that you basically used, and um, after we had heard about this, um, which I guess was on the 10th, the Friday, the security vulnerability management working group, so to say. That's a mouthful, but basically, there is a working group that is responsible for vulnerability management, and so those folks, got on board quickly. They ordered some scans to be done. So there is a tool called AppCheck, and basically the results of those scan pointed out 5 areas, like I mentioned. So UAA, which is the authentication tool; CredHub, which we use for credential management and rotation; CF deployment itself made use of Log4j, and then the newer CF for Gates was also making use of Log4j. Um, in some cases, because there was significant overlap with, I guess, UAA and CredHub, but there's also a couple of build packs, specifically obviously the Java build pack, I guess, but also the PHP build pack um, were um, were declared as affected. So after we got this list and made sure that AppScan um, completed its entire routine, which is basically coughing up UAA like multiple times and stuff. Um, by late evening on December 10th, we had this set of um, areas where we definitely needed to go in and cut a few new releases and things. So there was some information that we got again later on Friday about this being slightly more multidimensional than what it seemed. It was not like as simple as just go and change versions and things like that. So um, so a couple of different ways in which we could fix this um, was discussed and recommended. And later on Saturday was when we started to think about cutting our first releases and updates. So the UAA team actually released the first fix. This was early morning on Saturday. So if you're using UAA, I guess the simplest way to get over it is to upgrade to version 75.11 or higher. And then on Monday, early, like rather late on Sunday morning, but for practical purposes, Monday, I guess, CredHub released the 2.10 version, which mitigated um, the problem for CredHub. This was followed by um, CF Kates having a simpler path because UAA and CredHub both had new releases. Then CFR was just bumped up to use these two new versions on Monday, and we had like the problem solved in like 3-4 areas. In terms of communicating this, the security team also put up like some advisory on the Cloud Foundry blog, and we were able to push this news through Twitter as well. Now, on Wednesday, I guess yesterday, um, somebody had reported that they were hearing news about 2.15.0 also being vulnerable. So it was recommended to bump up Log4j to 2.16. And then all of the different components are now updated to 2.16. So everything is through the pipeline. CredHub, UAA, CFR kits, and some of the build pack stuff. So I guess we're yet to hear about um, the Java build pack, but otherwise all other components seem to be uh, updated, and the mitigation is declared complete as of now. So that's been the story from the Cloud Foundry community side about what we've been doing so far to fix this. If folks have any other experiences or stories or anything they want to share, you know, please come forward and make use of the time. It's as much yours as it is ours.
So I can share a little bit about the Cloud.gov experience if folks would find that interesting. I'm not sure how other people did, but I first heard about this Friday morning US East Coast time. And even though we had no evidence that we were being attacked or were vulnerable to it, immediately declared a potential incident since we knew that UAA and CredHub and some other components we run might be vulnerable. And it was gratifying that we have tools within our deployment process to use operators to set the initial property value that you could pass to JVMs, the -D switch for Log4j no format message lookups or whatever. So we were able to get ourselves into a pretty good position before the end of the day on Friday, as well as having WAF rules. And then we've just been very pleased with the speed at which the patches have come out of the community and the attention that you all have paid to it. So yeah, thanks.
Thanks, Peter. Anyone else have any thoughts, stories, comments, feedback? Okay. Well, thanks everybody for joining the December edition.
Sorry. I was scrambling for the mute button.
Sure.
Sorry. So I'll say I used to be on the Cloud.gov team, but now I'm a Cloud.gov user for another government team. It was gratifying for me to be able to, knowing that we were on a standardized platform, that we could look at ourselves in the community and see what was going on. And I was able to bring the attention to the Cloud.gov team about that operator environment variable group setting. So I could, help other people. So that was great and benefited the platform. One thing I would have spent more effort on the CF side was the PHP build pack. The PHP build pack, issued a new version because of app dynamics. AppDynamics is a service that's only available, I think, mostly on Pivotal deployments, or sorry, VMware deployments. It's generally not applicable to anybody running the open source version. And I think most of them don't have an AppDynamics service on their platform. And it was the driver for that service that was susceptible. And so I think one thing that could help is when releasing updates for things like that, be explicit about what might have put you in a category to be susceptible to the vulnerability. Because when I saw it, I do have PHP applications that were not on my radar at all as being affected. And when I saw there was a PHP build pack affected, I went into high alert saying, oh my gosh, I thought I wasn't affected. Maybe I am. So I think, the release notes for remediations saying, not only we've remediated the vulnerability for Log4j, but also this is how you can tell if you were, if this might have affected your application. Because in this case, it was an optional piece of code that was not invoked unless you had an AppDynamics service available and deployed and bound on the platform. So, if you just say, hey, there's a new PHP build pack to deal with Log4j, people in incident response positions are now scrambling to say, oh crap, what happened? Whereas if you instead said there's a new PHP build pack to deal with Log4j, but if you weren't using AppDynamics, then it doesn't matter to you. That would have helped a tremendous amount. In my case, I was curious enough to go look at the PHP build pack source and say, what did they fix? And I saw that it was AppDynamics, and I could look at the code and say, oh, it's only invoked if there's a service bound. So Chris is saying, is that the case? And the answer is yes, as far as I can tell. And so that's important because the nature of which component or build pack is updated will determine a whole swath of incident response process that cascades down from that in the organizations that are using those things. And a lot of people won't be as curious as I am or have the time that I did to go dig in and figure out, well, like, was I actually affected based on the change they made, as opposed to, well, I used the PHP build pack and there was an update, so I must have been affected. So that can trigger a lot of scrambling and running around. And so thinking about, whenever you give a notice to somebody saying, hey, there was a problem, you also want to give them information. Hey, there's a problem and we fixed it. You also want to give them information to say, and here's how you can tell if you were affected. So I would suggest that as just a general security practice for any kind of security update notification.
Yep, and I really apologize for not having considered that as part of any of the updates that I personally put out in any of the communications that I wrote on behalf of the community. So,
but no, just to be clear, no apologies necessary. It's fine. It's just for future something to consider as sort of a standard process when you're making these announcements.
Absolutely, and even specifically in this case, I think that's a great point that you made, and yeah, totally agree with you in terms of also communicating the scope of what gets affected, what gets not. So thank you for bringing that up, Brett.
So I'm just going to jump in with one other thing that Brett very helpfully over the weekend brought to our attention that tweet that I just put in the chat there, that there is the ability to set the set run environment group variable. So that gave us the ability to that would give an operator, I shouldn't say exactly what we did or didn't do because I haven't been cleared to speak on this, but it would give the opportunity for an operator of a Foundry to set a variable that for Log4j versions between 2.10 and 2.14 to not by default parse the JNDA lookups. And so one could set that across a foundation. And then in the course of a deployment, when cells get rolled over, all of the tenants will have their applications restarted and should pick up that environment variable. Particular developers or do have the opportunity to override that variable if they need to by setting their own environment variable. And but it was just a nice tool that operators have in their pocket for making changes across the platform in a minimally invasive way to secure their tenant applications. So that was cool. It doesn't solve everything because you still need people to restage their applications and check their dependencies to make sure that they're not pulling in Log4j someplace else. But every mitigation that you can get out quickly sort of narrows the opportunities for bad actors to get in.
Yeah, I think on the environment variable thing, I think that the tweet I was actually quoting or passed over had said something about like, you have to set this as an operator and then ask everybody to roll their apps. And it's like, no, you don't really have to ask everybody to roll their apps because the platform contract basically says we might evacuate you from a cell and therefore your app is going to get restarted and we'll pick up environment variables. The only reason they would need to be restaged in this case, since the variable affects runtime behavior, they would only need to be restaged if the environment variable you set affects staging behavior. And actually the platform has been a little overly cautious on that. In a lot of documentation, it says, hey, if you set environment variable, you have to restage your app. And that's not true. You only have to restage your app if the environment variable you set is used during the staging process. So yes, that's a blanket statement you can make that will make sure it's always right. But the reality is if you set environment variable and it's not used in the staging process, all you have to do is restart your app to pick up that environment variable. And so for that reason, you can set it as an operator and no restaging is necessary. In this case, as an operator, we know this variable is only used during the running period. It's not used during the staging period. So they don't have to restage. You can just, roll all the cells and know that your customers' apps have all been restarted and they're all picking it up. So I really appreciate the fact that the platform allows you to minimize the impact on customers that way, and it's a huge deal. And I think we should all be trumpeting it from the clouds in blog posts everywhere to say this is why you should use a PaaS and this is why Cloud Foundry is good. So I'd love to see a blog post following up on that and saying, how using a PaaS helps deal with systemic or widespread problems like this. And here's an example of how mitigations roll out.
Yeah, particularly because web application firewalls are so limited in their utility here because there are so many different patterns that no regular expression was going to catch them all. And any particular, it would certainly protect you from the spray and pray people out there that are just saying, hey, but what's targetable out there? But any one who was particularly wanting to target your organization would easily find their way past a web application firewall, is my understanding. I'm afraid I have to leave in a minute because I had another meeting I couldn't reschedule, but I'd be curious if other people had experiences that they wanted to share on responding to this before I drop off. Oh, I never introduced myself. I'm Peter Burkhold. I'm the Security and Compliance Lead for Cloud.gov over in GSA.
Thanks for joining us, Peter, and sharing all that information. Do folks have anything else to share? Anybody's mic's on mute by mistake? No, I guess not. Again, thank you so much for joining us in this edition's CAB call. Let's all meet the following year. And thank you, Ashley, for patiently recording and helping upload all of these calls and keeping the tradition of CAB calls alive throughout the year. See you all next year then. Bye-bye.
Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining. Happy holidays and Happy New Year.
Thank you. You too. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Yeah.
Thanks, Ashley.
Thanks.